So welcome everybody. We are going to be looking at the biblical sources that are the foundation of the concept of Shmita. We have talked a lot during the high holidays about the Shmita being an opportunity for release and for taking a break. It has some environmental, agricultural dimensions. It has some social dimensions and some justice dimensions. Shmita is a concept that is quite large, and we're going to see how different sections in the Torah address or highlight different aspects of what Shmita is about and eventually came to be. The laws of Shemita appear in three different sections in the Torah: in the book of Exodus, in the book of Leviticus, in the book of Deuteronomy, and each of these sections highlights a different aspect of Shemita. And so we're going to see now all of these things then later on became integrated into a practice of Shmita that sort of incorporated all of these different elements. Some of them were deemed to be impractical as biblical society evolved later on into a society that was larger, more complex, and the practice of Shmita became complicated, and you'll see why some of these things became complicated later on. And so the rabbis had somewhat of a difficult time trying to hold on to all of these different aspects and to evolve a halakha, a Jewish law that would reflect the biblical prescription, which in many cases is deemed to be some sort of an ideal, but not deemed to be implementable so easily. So I'm going to show you some of those things. First of all, the word Shmita. Shmita means to release. And so to call the year of Shmita a year of release is actually an accurate translation. Shmita means to release. I want to indicate, I see that we're about 60 people here. And if you'd like to ask a question, please don't be shy. If it's on target, on subject, don't hesitate to either raise your hand or I'm having a little difficulty teaching and following the chat at the same time. So better to raise your hand or to unmute yourself if I don't see the hand up. I sometimes get carried away with the teaching, so just let me know, okay? Danny put in the chat is that the Chazon booklet, Danny?
That's the sign-in link.
The sign-in, okay.
I'm putting in the Chazon link now.
Okay, so everyone. The Chazon link is for later. You don't have to open it right now. I mean, Danny can put it there, and then you'll retrieve it later. And it's actually a wonderful collection of sources, from biblical to rabbinic to Hasidic to contemporary reflections on all sorts of aspects of Shmita, both the environmental, social justice, the rest aspect of Shmita. It's a great collection of sources. I have scanned the section about biblical sources, and so at the end of the session you can have those sources with you, and it has some interesting questions that it asks on the side of the page for reflection and for further study. So you'll see it's organized a little different than I want to conduct the session this evening, so I'm not using those sources as they appear in that Chazon book, but you are welcome to have them, okay? So I'm going to start with presenting what appears I'm going to share my screen, what appears in the book of Shemot. And this appears, this section, chapter 23 of the book of Shemot, appears after the section of the revelation at Sinai and the Ten Commandments. And this is in Parshat Mishpatim. So the Ten Commandments, as the Israelite people, the Hebrew nation, came in front of Mount Sinai. Before Mount Sinai, God revealed God's self, gave there the Ten Commandments, and it was an awesome moment, an awesome experience, awesome in the real sense of the word, awesome experience for everybody who was there. It was God's self-disclosure. And God gave some sort of the Ten Commandments, sort of the major or some major laws, mitzvot, but then comes Parshat Mishpatim and spells out a great number of mitzvot that have to do with social rules, moral imperatives, ethical injunctions, laws that have to do with civil and criminal laws, all sorts of things about prescriptions about the worship and cult. And so it's a collection of varied issues and subjects in the book of Mishpatim. It's almost like a spelling out of the fine print. If the Parshat Yitro and the revelation at Sinai is the event itself with some sort of big print issues like the Ten Commandments, the parasha that follows, Parshat Mishpatim, is actually the fine print. And here we find, actually, Parshat Mishpatim starts on chapter 22, and it is about the treatment of slaves. It's about what the Torah says about how slaves, how masters should relate in biblical times to their slaves. What were the rights of the slaves, of Hebrew slaves? They did have rights. And then we come to chapter 23, and you'll see what it says here. You shall not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness. So it's about rumors and about being honest in your testimony. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert in favor of the mighty. So don't favor the mighty in order to hurt somebody who is weak, right, in society. Nor shall you show deference to a poor person in his dispute. Don't show favor because the person is poor. Don't show favor if actually the powerful person is in the right. When you encounter your enemy's ox or ass wandering, you must take it back to him. Be honest and return somebody else's possession that you find, return it to them. When you see the ass of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless raise it with him. You shall not subvert the rights of your needy in their disputes. You see a pattern here already. Keep far from a false charge. Do not bring death on those who are innocent and in the right, for I will not acquit the wrongdoer. This is about false charges and false witness. Don't accuse somebody who is innocent. Do not take bribes. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. What's common to all these things? It's a variety of laws that have to do with primarily with justice, with testimony, with returning somebody's possession. All these things are things that people do. First of all, it's addressed to individuals. All of this is addressed to individuals. And it's all sorts of things that nobody will find out if you do one of these things. You only are the ones who know. You are the only person who knows if you are giving false testimony, if you find something that belongs to somebody else and you don't return it. It's all sorts of things that that most of these things people will not, if you share false rumors, people will not find out about these things. So God is saying, be careful, I am watching, and you have to do the right thing. Now, when we come here to verse 10, we already switch to something that is addressed to the community, and you see that there's a switch here in the theme. Okay, the theme is now 6 years you shall sow your land and gather it in its yield. It's no longer about ethical concerns. It's about an agricultural injunction. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But in the 7th year, you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Here you have the word tishmetena on verse 11. Ve'ashvi'it tishmetena unetashta. Tishmetena, you shall release it. Okay, you shall release it. And here's the word Shmita. Okay, here's the root of the word Shmita. Unetashta, and you have to abandon it. Ve'achlu evyonei amecha. Let the needy among your people eat of it. And what they leave, let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and with your olive groves. We're going to come back to this. 6 days you shall do your work. So you see the theme here. The Torah shifted from ethical concerns that pertain to the individual who could get away with some of these transgressions. And God is saying, I'm watching. Do the right thing. Not because some of the things that you are doing, you are the only one who knows. I'm going to let you go unpunished. Be careful. Do the right thing. But here we're already talking about 6 years you shall sow the land. On the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Here you have Sheshet Yamim Ta'aseh Ma'asecha. On 6 days you shall work. On the 7th day shall cease from labor. That's a Shabbat, of course, right? That you, in order that your ox and your ass may rest, and that your bondman and the stranger may be refreshed. So the first one is the land has to rest every 7th year so that poor people can eat of it, and the wild beasts as well. And on the 7th day of the week, it's so that the animals and the slaves and the strangers may rest and be refreshed. And then be on guard concerning all that I have told you. Make no mention of the names of other gods. So this, we're turning to something different, which is about worship and idolatry. And then we turn to the 3 festivals. Shalosh regalim tachok li bashana. 3 times a year you shall hold a festival for me. And then he talks about Pesach, and he talks about the Feast of the Harvest, which is not called Shavuot, but it's called Chag HaKatzir, the festival, the Feast of Harvest. And then it talks about, and Chag HaAsif, this is Sukkot. Chag HaKatzir, Shavuot, Chag HaAsif, Sukkot. But you see, they are completely agricultural festivals. It's not talking about anything historical, except for, not even Pesach. It's the festival of the unleavened bread, the festival of the harvest, and the festival of the feast of the ingathering. So this is about the 3 seasons. It's agricultural laws that have to do with the 3 holidays, and the Shmita is at the beginning of this section that talks about calendar, about time. 6 years and 1 year, 6 days and 1 day Shabbat. And then you have the Shalosh Regalim. And this is addressed to the entire community, not just to the individuals, as was the first part of the section in this chapter, but this is addressed to the entire community. The 7th year, therefore, together appears here with the Shabbat and with the 3 pilgrimage holidays. This is the time when Shalosh Pe'amim Bashana, 3 times a year, all the males shall appear before Adonai, Pnei Adon Adonai, before God, meaning they have to go to the temple to worship there 3 times a year. So you see the first appearance of Shmita in the Torah is about leaving the land lie fallow, just as we have 1 day of rest every 7th day during the week, just a day when we let go. But here it seems to have some social connotation. Both the Shmita and the Shabbat, both have a social connotation. The needy people can come and eat, as well as the beasts, and on Shabbat, so that your ox and your ass may rest. They work hard during the week. It's an agricultural society. These animals are used heavily during the week, and now comes the time when animals also deserve to rest, as well as the bondman and the stranger. Okay, the strangers were people who also put themselves to work for people who are powerful. The strangers had very little rights. They usually had no possessions, and they put themselves at the service of somebody very powerful, and they had the right to rest on Shabbat. So you see, this is the first section. Let me stop here and ask if there are any comments or questions before we move to a different section of the Torah, and we're going to see a different perspective on Shmita. So far, it's an agricultural thing. Shmita here is an agricultural thing. It has a social dimension, and it's brought in the Torah together with the first part of that chapter are ethical concerns. So maybe it's not just a question of calendar, but a question also of some sort of an ethical dimension as well here. Okay? The transition between the first part of the chapter and the second part of the chapter is not so clear. We were talking about all sorts of ethical concerns, about false rumors and testimony and returning things that were lost by people, returning it to them.
Not hearing anything.
Roly got disconnected. It's that
Yeah.
Roly left.
Roly left.
I'm sure he'll be back.
He had enough of us, huh?
Take your day off.
Take your shoes off.
Promise he'll return.
Now Donnie is listed as the host.
There she is. Huh.
Looks like he's back.
Life happened.
Okay, I'm back. Something happened with my computer. Okay, so I'm back. So, okay, so clear up to now, it's not very clear the transition from the ethical concerns to the calendar. And by the way, in Parshat Mishpatim, this section that comes after the revelation at Sinai is a collection. And sometimes it's a collection of very, very different laws. As I said, social rules, criminal law, civil law, ethical injunctions, and so on. And sometimes the material is not very, very clearly organized, and the transitions are not also very very smooth. So is there a relationship between the first part of the chapter and the second part of the chapter that talks about the calendar? Maybe the fact that there is an ethical aspect to these commandments regarding the calendar. Okay? So anybody has any comment, question? David, go ahead. I have Martha, David, and Deb. Please try to be brief so we can
Sure.
move on to the next
Yeah.
thing.
My question is Shmita related to the same root as Shmot, as in were we released from slavery? Is there?
No. The title Shemot of the book of Shemot is with a taf at the end. Shmita is with a tet. It's a completely different root. Shemot means names, because the beginning verse of the book of Exodus is Ele Shemot Bnei Israel. These are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt with Jacob. So Shemot, the name of the book, means names. The root Shin Mem Tet, Shamot, means to release, to open up, to release, to set free. Thank you, David. Martha?
The thing that struck me as you were talking was that I think of Shmita as biblical, but particularly the last comments you made, migrant laborers, there are definitely real parallels, and there are real ethical comparisons that still make it very relevant.
Correct. I mean, there were people who were indentured laborers, slaves basically, people who had to put themselves at the service of others because they ran out of money and they didn't have land, or they had sold their land. If somebody had sold their land and went through all their cash, they didn't have anything to eat. They had to put themselves at the service of others. So they were indentured workers. Sometimes it was temporary until they could regain food and repay their debts, but people who had, we are going to see this a little later, but imagine a society like that. It's an agricultural society. So people who have, first of all, if you have land, if you have no land, then you have to work for somebody else, right? You have to employ yourself, you put yourself in the employment of somebody else. Strangers didn't have land, okay? And so they had to work for somebody else. So they were among the poor, usually, among the most vulnerable and the poor. Now, if somebody had land, in order to work the land, they needed to make a number of investments. They needed to buy seeds. They needed to have animals. They need to buy animals to work the land. They needed to buy tools, right? And all these things were expensive. Now, if the person had a good year in the harvest, then he would make back his investment and then some. But if it didn't rain enough that year, and the person had a very disastrous harvest, then that person was in debt. And in order to be able to buy seeds for the next season, or tools, or animals, or anything that they needed, or to employ people, also, that cost money. They had to, even if they had slaves, or indentured people who worked for them, or strangers, they had to pay them. So if the person had a bad harvest, then that person wouldn't be able to access all those things. They had to either sell their land, and sometimes they had to put themselves at the service of somebody else. Okay, so it was not simple to live in a society like that. And even people who were landowners were often at the risk, they were often at the mercy of the rains and the crops. So if it was a bad year or a couple of bad years in a row, it was very serious. So Deb, you had a question? Okay, so let me turn now to the second section and share my screen. And this is a section in the book of Leviticus chapter 25, Parshat Behar. Look what it says. We're going to read a few verses from here. Adonai spoke to Moshe on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Shabbat of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and in 6 years you may prune, your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Shabbat of complete rest, a Shabbat of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, and the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat its yield. Let's stop here. So here is a very different story. First of all, look at the word that is being used here. Do you see the word Shmita here? What word do you see here? Somebody unmute and tell me. What word do you see here?
Shabbat.
Huh?
Shabbat.
Shabbat. So here you see the word Shabbat appears. In the other text, it wasn't the word Shabbat. Shabbat appeared as 6 days you shall work, and on the 7th day, the word Shabbat even didn't appear there. But here, the word Shabbat appears, and it appears as V'shavta ha'aretz Shabbat l'Adonai. The land shall observe a Shabbat of Adonai. Just as we human beings observe a Shabbat, so the land observes a Shabbat. So the focus here is not on people. The focus here is on the land, you see? The land will rest. In the other section, it was the land will rest so that everybody could come and eat. In this case, it seems that the focus of the sabbatical year is the land itself. The land shall observe a Shabbat of the Lord. 6 years you may sow and do all these things, but on the 7th year, the land shall have a rest, a Shabbat of complete rest. The land will have a rest. So this is some sort of a agricultural, perhaps, some sort of technique to let the earth take a rest. And just like human beings have to replenish on Shabbat, catch their breath, take a break, regain strength, so the land has to take a breath and regenerate. The land becomes depleted if it's used constantly with no rest. And so here is a way to let the earth restore itself and replenish. Okay, so the 7th year is a Shabbat. You have it here again, Shabbat l'Adonai. See, already twice you have, how many times it's the word Shabbat appears here? Look, here you have a Shavta ha'aretz Shabbat l'Adonai. Shavta means to cease, to rest. 1, 2, 3. Shabbat, Shabbaton, 3, 4, 5. You see, you have the word Shabbat is some sort of a leitmotif here. Shabbaton, 6. V'haita Shabbat haaretz, 7. You see? Shabbat haaretz, the Shabbat of the land. So the focus is on the land, and you have this word that appears over and over again. Okay? The rest for the land. Now, it also happens that it says here, you may eat whatever you want from the land, your male and female slaves, everybody may come and eat. In other words, on this year, it's a rest for the land and the free for all to come, including the beasts, can come and eat. That's comparable to the section in Shmot, in Exodus, but in Exodus, it only spoke about the poor and the beasts. Here is everybody. You, your male and female slaves. So that in a sense, what this is creating is some sort of a rebalancing where everybody is on the same level. Not only those who can afford it will eat, but everybody will eat at the same level. You, meaning the owner of the land, because this is addressed to the owner of the land. You, the slaves, the hired and bound laborers, everybody who lives with you can come and eat. Everybody has the same right to the land. And how come? Now let's continue and let's see why it is so. And it says, and you shall count 7 weeks of years. 7 times 7 years. So you see the word 7 appears already a number of times. In the book of Shmot, it appeared next to this, right? The 7th year, the 7th day. We already had also earlier on, a couple of chapters earlier, the 7th month, which is the month of Elul, which is the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So the 7th is always important. The 7th day, the 7 weeks of 7, that's how we count from Pesach to Shavuot. The 7th month, the 7th year is the sabbatical year. And now 7 times 7. What is 7 times 7?
49.
49. So that the period of 7 weeks of 7 years gives a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn, the shofar, in the 7th month, you see, in the month of Elul, on the 10th day of the month, on Yom Kippur, they sounded the shofar on the 49th year throughout the land. All over the land on Yom Kippur, they sounded the shofar, and they indicated that this is the beginning of the 50th year, which is the Jubilee year. You shall proclaim release. Okay? You shall proclaim release. It's Yovel means release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to its holding, and each of you shall return to his family. All the people now, all the slaves are free. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow. So now it's 2 years in a row. The 49th year is a sabbatical year because it's a multiple of 7. It's every 7th year. So the 49th year is a sabbatical year, and the 50th year as well. And it says here that for 2 years, the 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. You shall not sow. You shall not reap. It's a jubilee. It's holy for you. And you may only eat the growth direct from the field. Only what grows naturally you can eat. Okay? And everybody returns to their holding. All the slaves are freed. And actually, the land that has been sold on the Jubilee year returns to its original owners. The land had been divided when it was conquered, divided into the 12 tribes. Except the Levites didn't have land, but the tribe of Joseph was divided into Ephraim and Menashe. So there were 12 different tribes that divided, got each a section of the land. and that division was maintained, and the original possession of the land of each family was maintained, meaning that if somebody sold their land to somebody from a different tribe or to a different family on the 50th year, the land will revert to the original owner. The land is never sold in perpetuity. Why? We have to go to verse 23 for that. But first, let's read a little bit more. When you sell your property to your neighbor, or buy any from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another, right? In buying from your neighbor, you shall deduct only the number of years since the Jubilee. And in selling, he shall charge you only for the remaining crop years. You are buying, you're leasing the land for the number of years between this year and year 50. Because on year 50, the land goes back to the original owner. So if there's only 3 years remaining between now and the 50th year, you're not gonna pay full price. You're gonna pay just what the price for 3 years of crops. Somebody who's buying on year 1 and has 49 years of crops is going to pay much more than somebody who's just buying for the next 3 years, because on year 49 or 50 actually, the 49 it rests fallow, and on the year 50 it goes back to the original owner. You understand how it works? Okay, so the land is never sold in perpetuity, and so this is what it says here. One second, it's on verse. Okay, here. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim. You can never sell the land in perpetuity. For the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. In other words, we belong to the land doesn't belong to us. And those who possess the land are just have only stewardship of the land for a number of years. And God is the one who is the owner of the land. And God decides the land has to rest. It's not yours to decide. It's not for you to decide when or if the land will rest. Now, if we go to verse 39, here's verse 39. I, Adonai, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. If your kinsman under you continues in straits and must give himself over to you, do not subject him to the treatment of a slave. He shall remain with you as a hired or bound laborer. This is a person who fell into need, right? And had to put himself at the service of somebody else. Shall not subject him to the treatment of a slave. He shall remain with you as a hired or bound laborer. He shall serve you only until the Jubilee year. In the Jubilee year, that person goes free. Whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, on the Jubilee year, they go free. In other words, indentured work, a person who has to put themselves in that situation does not ever become a permanent condition. In Jewish law, a Jewish slave, it's a different for a non-Jewish slave, but a Jewish slave is never a condition unless they decide they want to stay as slaves. There is a way in which a slave says, I don't want to go free, I am happy here. It's not well seen, it was not well regarded, but a slave is not, slavery is not it's not a human permanent condition. It's a temporary condition. So Shmita here is rest for the land. The fact that everybody can come and there's some sort of an equalizer in society, everybody can come and eat, just like the owner, the slave, the indentured worker, the bondsperson, everybody could eat. And in addition, on the 50th year, on the year of the Jubilee, the land goes back to the original owners and there's freedom from servitude. That's what Shmita means And Shmita and the Jubilee mean in the book of Leviticus. Okay? Different than what we saw in the book of Shemot. This is much more comprehensive. And by the way, there's also a great focus on the land itself, on the needs of the land. The land, in many ways, is personified here, has the right to rest just like humans have the right to rest on Shabbat. Any questions or comments? Eleanor, go ahead.
It's very shocking when I think it through because the land is elevated in a sense above the people. The people only have to be nice every 7 years. They have to share. But built into these psukim is hierarchy. It's the separation of classes. It's Earth's needs. That's important. I mean, it's all important, but it's a big deal to have Shmita in Jubilee.
Very big deal.
It's a very
big deal because I would say it's a prescription, a practice against abuse. It's a practice against abuse of people, abuse of the land itself, abuse of animals. In many ways it's a warning. And God says, the land doesn't belong to you. The land belongs to me. We don't have that consciousness. The consciousness here, what we have is ours. This phone is mine. This computer is mine. This house is mine. Time is mine. Everything is mine. And here comes the book of Leviticus and gives you a different perspective. Nothing that you have is yours. What you think is yours is not yours. It belongs to God. You're just entrusted with this. You have stewardship. You're entrusted with your life. You're entrusted with time. You're entrusted with possessions, with beasts, and so on. It's a powerful message that it's a consciousness that is difficult for us, particularly in a capitalistic society when everything is about owning, right? Everything is owned. It's owned by individuals, or corporations, but there's the concept of ownership, and the Torah comes and throws that up in the air. And it's very, very profound because it's not just about land, it's about people, it's about time. I mean, the fact that we have Shabbat every 7th day, it means you can't do whatever you want with your time. On the 7th rest, you have to let go. You can do whatever you want on 6 days, but not on the 7th day. It's not up to you. So let's move to the third section, which is in the book of Deuteronomy, and you'll see this is quite different from what we've seen. You'll see here a different perspective. Okay, this is the book of Deuteronomy, verse 15. So you'll see what it says here. Every 7th year you shall practice remission of debts. Look at the word here. Miket sheva shanim taseh shmita. You see the word shmita here? Same word as we found in the book of Exodus. But here it will tell you. Ze dvar shmita. Here it says, every 7th year you shall do shmita. Now I will tell you what shmita means. Ze davar shmita. This shall be the nature of the shmita. Shamot, same word. Every creditor shall remit the due that he claims from his fellow. Where is this coming from? It's not like in Exodus. It's not like in the book of Leviticus. This is something completely new. What is the 7th year about? The 7th year is about letting go of every claim that you have of somebody else's. Somebody else that owes you money. You have to let go of those claims. Every creditor shall remit the due that he claims from his fellow. You have to let go of those claims. He shall not dun his fellow or kinsman, for the remission proclaimed is of the Lord. And you have here the word Shmita 1, the word Shmita twice, 3 times, 4 times. Okay? It resounds. Shmita, Shmita, Shmita. And here it means remission of debts. You may dun the foreigner, because you're not really obligated to a foreigner. You're obligated. You're not obligated to. I mean, you're obligated to treat people decently. You're not obligated to forget a debt or to forgive a debt with somebody who's a foreigner. But you must remit whatever is due you from your kinsman. Look at the word that is used here. What's the word here in Hebrew? What's the word here in Hebrew? Eleanor.
Brother.
Achicha, brother. And look at here. Achiv, brother, his brother. Right? So a foreigner, I mean, this is going an extra mile. A person owes you money, they owe you money. It's your right to collect the money. It's not unethical to say, somebody owes me money, I want my money back. It's not unethical. But here it says, on the 7th year, you must forgive the debt, obviously, of somebody who can't repay you. Not if you give money to somebody who can repay you, they should repay you. But this is understood to be somebody who cannot repay you. If they repay you, they have to borrow from somebody else and enter into debt and pay interest to that. Get money from somewhere who will charge them a lot of interest. In order to repay you, they have to borrow somewhere else. So this is in order to prevent that people fall into great need. So somebody who can't repay you on the 7th year, if it's somebody from your community, achicha, your brother, but it's not literally your brother, your kinsperson, then you have to forgive the debt. There shall be no needy among you. That's the reason. Since Adonai your God will bless you, if you do this, Moshe says here, in the name of God, if you do this, if you're kind and generous, then God will bless you, and you will not lack anything. If only you heed Adonai your God and take care to keep this instruction that I enjoin you upon you to this day. In other words, they are not going to be needy people if you all behave this way, if you're generous with one another, and prevent that somebody will fall into a situation from which they cannot climb back into solvency. If you do that, if you're generous, then God will bless you and there will be no poor. For Adonai God will bless you as He promised you, and so on and so forth. But now, it says on verse 7, if, however, there is a needy person among you, the ideal is that there will be no poor people. But in the reality in which we live, not everybody is so general. Not everybody is so generous. So if there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen, mechad achecha, okay, one of your brothers, in any of your settlements in the land that Adonai your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Why? Because the human tendency is to close our hand, to say, listen, I don't want to give you anything for free. There are no free lunches. Whatever I have, I'm going to keep to myself, and I'm going to, even if I have more than I need, I'm going to accumulate. That's the human tendency. So here it says, no, what you should do not harden your heart. be sensitive, be compassionate, and do not shut your hand. Open your hand, release. Okay, it's also part of release. Me'achicha evion, from your needy brother. See the word brother, how many times it appeared here? You see that? It's also a leitmotif. It's a word that appears over and over. And it's saying, remember, the people who live with you in your community, don't treat them as somebody that you have nothing to do with. Treat them as family, people in your community, people you live with, your neighbors. They are your family. They're your brother and sister. And therefore, you have the obligation of a kinsperson to them. They are your kin. They are family. You have obligations towards your family. So you have to relate to people in society that way. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. Sufficient for whatever he needs. Okay, now, this means that all of this is not enforceable by law. All of this is left to people's willingness to open their heart, to their generosity. And so this is an exhortation. It's something that cannot be enacted into law, cannot be enforced, and therefore it's left to people's generosity. That's why this is an exhortation to people, okay? I want to show you, you can look later in the sources that I'm going to give you, that Danny put in the chat. You can further look at some of the questions they ask regarding this text. But I want to stop and take a couple of questions, and then I want to show you one more text. I have David and I have Sarah. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. So it says God said to Moses, tell the people of Israel, and these were the people who were wandering in the desert who had no land, and they didn't have the land set because they were moving for 40 years.
Right.
So this is all, in a sense, hypothetical. This is what your grandchildren will do in a land that you're not going to live to see. Which
these are the people themselves who are going to go into the land, because the generation of the desert is dead now in the book of Deuteronomy, and he's talking to the people who were born in the wilderness and are going to enter the land and are going to establish a new society. And of course, their children and grandchildren and descendants are the ones who are going to continue to observe these laws, but it's establishing a pattern, a social modality of how we should relate to one another and how we should relate to people who are in need.
And did they do that?
And you can see here there's absolutely nothing about resting the land, about the fact that everybody can come and eat on the 7th year. All that was said in the book of Leviticus and in the book of Exodus about eating, everybody could eat freely. This is exclusively focused on the fact that on the 7th year, this is new now. It didn't say this in the other books of the Torah. This is a new item that appears here. And this new item is remission of debts. On the 7th year, if somebody owes you money and can't repay, do not harden your heart. Do not claim. Let go of that claim. Let them not repay you, so that they will not fall further into poverty. And so that there is, every 7th year, there's some sort of a rebalancing of society, you understand? So that there is a redressing. Because if there is never a redressing, rich people get richer, and poor people get poorer and poorer, generally. And this is what's happening in our society, right? So Israelite society, or the Torah, in this case in the book of Devarim, wants to make sure, in the book of Leviticus, it was installing the awareness that nothing is actually yours. It all belongs to God. And you can't behave as you wish. You have to, there's some limitations in terms of what you can do and how you can abuse or not abuse the land or people. in this book of Deuteronomy is this rebalancing so that things don't get out of hand. So there's a corrective every 7 years, because naturally the imbalances do happen. But every 7 years there's a rebalancing and redressing. I have Sarah and I have Jenny.
So I'm really stuck on, unless it's a foreigner, the word for, that we treat a foreigner differently. And it seems contradictory to the whole thing, that we all take care of each other. So is the foreigner a non-Jew? How do we decide who is not our kinsman? What
Yes.
about whoever is hungry shall come and eat? So I'm really stuck on that one.
Right. So the Israelites are a community. It's a people. It's a nation, right? And there were people there who were not part of the Israelite community. They were Canaanites, other people who were there, or who came into the land from a neighboring community. It's the primary obligation, in terms of the obligation to open your hand and to forgive the debt, is to your people, Now, nothing prevents a person from being extra generous and extra sensitive and act the same way with somebody who's not from your community. But the primary obligation is towards your community. That's the majority of the people. Jenny?
Yes, I was thinking about the taxi drivers in New York who were hunger striking
Right.
because they got caught in this impossible spiral of debt because they were encouraged to invest in
Correct.
ridiculously
Medallions.
expensive taxi medallions, and the value
Yeah.
plummeted. And there's a special despair in being caught in a spiral of debt you can't escape from. It must be like slavery.
A number of people committed suicide among the taxi drivers. And they were in total despair because they couldn't repay their debts. They were falling further and further into debt. And out of despair, a number of them took their lives. So now I think there's been I think they've been given an amount of money to be able to repay some of their debts. And there's a plan for them to get out of that debt. But that's a modern, in many ways, sort of a modern version of what we're studying. I mean, what we're studying about was an entirely agricultural society. Now, when society, as I told you in the beginning, when society became more complex, the implementation of Shemita became more difficult. To let the land lie fallow for an entire year without crops, when you have when people had, economies were more complex than in small scale biblical society type of thing later on, it became almost not only impractical but almost impossible to allow for the land to lie fallow. And so there were a number of mechanisms, and also the question of debts. That people had to collect their debts. They needed to collect whatever they had. What happened is that if you can't collect the debt, what ends up happening is nobody wants to lend. If you come to me, Jenny, and you say, lend me some money, and I know that next year you're not going to repay me that debt because it's the year of Shmita, I'm going to say, sorry, Jenny, I can't lend you, but please, I need it. I'm sorry. So what happened is that people were refraining from lending. You can't have a society, an economy can't work without people being able to borrow money. As I said, they needed money to buy seeds, to buy animals, to buy tools, to employ people. So people needed to be able to borrow. And if nobody wants to lend because I know that I'm going to have to forgive the debt next year, I don't want to lend you, the economy crashes. So in rabbinic times, and I think either Felicia or Becca, I think Becca is going to teach about sort of the rabbinic Shmita in rabbinic times, you will see what mechanisms they created in order for sort of to bypass this injunction about not collecting debts. You understand the problem in a society, an economy can't function if there's no lending. And a society can't function when there are a lot of people to feed and the fields are lying fallow. So, particularly the previous year or two were not good crops and people couldn't store, for the year of the Shmita, so it became very, very complicated. But what we have is the principle. The principle is don't abuse the land, don't abuse people, don't consider that this belongs to you, it doesn't, belongs to God, and therefore relate to it that way, and be generous. And there is some mechanism by which the equilibrium in society, the economic equilibrium within society, has to be reestablished from time to time. There has to be some reset button so that people don't fall further into poverty and then they commit suicide. So those are the principles. Now, how to implement that, it's now in a society such complex as our contemporary society, even more, many times more complex. That's a different story. I want to show you I have Tzipora. Please unmute, Tzipora.
Hi, am I there now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't understand how we as a country, and I'm talking about us as Israelis, we can do what we do with the land then. I just read something about somebody from J Street coincidentally visiting the West Bank, and he saw a demolition of this family, Palestinians, and it broke his heart. And they were standing there, the little children, and watching everything,
it's a terrible, it's a catastrophe, it's a terrible thing. It is not directly related to the issues of Shmita.
Isn't it?
It is related to the issue of sensitivity to the other, to the sense of, the land. Why do we say the land is mine? The land has to be shared. We belong to the land, not the land to us. So, it's related in that sense. And it's a tragedy. It's a terrible tragedy. It's a terrible tragedy that somebody says, this is mine and this is not yours. And instead of saying, well, this belongs to God, we have to figure out now how we live together in here. I want to share the last text. This is going to be short. It's chapter 31 of the book of Dvarim, of Deuteronomy. And here, it's Moshe's farewell. And in Moshe's farewell, Moshe says, you have to put this book into writing. And he probably was talking about the book of Deuteronomy, which is his teaching. And he says here in verse 10, okay, look at verse 9. Moshe wrote down this teaching and gave it to the priests, sons of Levi, who carried the ark of the Lord's covenant, and to the elders, all the elders of Israel. So he put down this teaching into writing. And Moshe instructed them as follows. Every seventh year, see here the same motif, every seventh year, the year set for remission, Shnata Shmita, you have the word Shmita here. Okay? Shata Shmita, Bechag HaSukkot, on the seventh year, on the holiday of Sukkot, when all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God in the place that God will choose. In other words, everybody would go in pilgrimage to Jerusalem. You shall read this teaching aloud in the presence of all Israel. Gather the people, akhel et ha'am, gather the people, men, women, and children, and the strangers in your community, that they may hear and so learn to revere Adonai your God and to observe faithfully every word of these teachings. So another aspect of Shmita was that on the seventh year, on Sukkot, the teaching, meaning the book of Deuteronomy, would be read publicly. Everybody was assembled, and it says men, women, and children, and strangers, foreigners. The whole community would come together in Jerusalem, and this book was read publicly. It took probably a few hours for this book to be read, with all its injunctions and its teachings, including the section we just read, Deuteronomy 15, about the remission of debt, so that everybody will have that present. There were no books in those days. And so every 7th year, people had to hear this teaching and be reminded not only of the Shmita and the remission of debts, but of everything that Moshe had taught and in God's name taught and commanded upon the community. Okay, so this is another aspect of Shmita. So we saw Shmita, hold on 1 second, Shmita meaning in the book of Exodus, the land shall not be worked, everybody, all the poor people can come and the beasts can come and eat. In the book of Leviticus, the Shmita is a time for the land to rest and for everybody to come and be equally serve themselves from the land, but the land must rest. And in the Jubilee year, all the slaves and all the indentured people are going free back to their families. And the land goes back to its original owners on the Jubilee year. In the book of Deuteronomy, the Shmita is primarily about the opportunity for generosity, to open one's heart and to forgive remission of debts for people who can't pay them, so as to create some sort of a equilibrium, economic equilibrium in society once again, every 7th year. And then we read in the book, at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, that this is the year, Shmita, when the teaching has to be reviewed and internalized, so that everybody can be reminded how we shall live, how we shall treat one another, and so on. Okay? So those are the sources that mention Shmita, the 7th year, the Shabbat of the land, remission of debts, all these things. Those are the biblical sources. As I said to you, once we move into rabbinic times and further on, some of these things become very complicated. And so the rabbis have all sorts of laws that they create in order to rescue sort of the essence, the principle of these teachings, but also to make it give the possibility for society to be able to function, even by having to bypass some of these injunctions that we encounter today.